You do not need to do anything right now. There is nowhere to go, nothing to remember. Just allow the sound to remain with you as the body settles and the day begins to loosen its hold. Long before names were given to forces, before stories learned how to speak in gods and spirits, there was only the world itself, not explained, not divided, simply lived within. This was the Slavic world before gods, before belief had structure, before meaning needed symbols. A time when people did not ask why the world moved, only how to move gently inside it. You are safe here. As you listen, there is no history you must follow closely, no details you must hold onto. The world will unfold slowly, like a quiet morning, with no clear beginning. These lands were wide and patient, forests stretching farther than memory, rivers moving without urgency, fields resting between seasons. There were no borders yet, no lines to say where one place ended and another began. Only paths made by feet, by animals, by time itself. The people who lived here did not think of themselves as early or ancient. They did not feel unfinished. They felt present. Each day arrived without ceremony. Morning light filtered through trees. Smoke rose slowly from hearths, and life began again. Before gods, meaning came from rhythm, from waking, from sleeping, from planting, from waiting. The earth was not sacred, and it was not ordinary. It simply was. People learned when to move by watching shadows, when to rest by listening to birds grow quiet, when to prepare by noticing how the air changed. There was no need to explain these things. They were felt. As you listen now, you may feel that same slowing, a gentle widening of time, nothing pressing forward, nothing pulling back, just the steady presence of being here. Homes were simple, built from what was close at hand. Wood shaped slowly, clay pressed patiently. There was no desire to last forever, only to last through the season. And when a structure aged, it returned quietly to the land. No loss, no alarm. Daily life followed the light, not clocks. Hands learned their tasks by repetition, not instruction. Grinding grain, mending tools, carrying water. Movements repeated until they no longer needed thought. This is where rest lived, inside familiarity, when nothing new demanded attention, and nothing old caused worry. The body knew what came next. Children grew without being told what the world meant. They learned by moving within it, running through tall grass, watching insects pause and continue, feeling cold water close around ankles. Understanding came without words. Before gods, there was no separation between human life and the world around it. No sense of standing apart. No feeling of being observed. Only participation. At night, darkness was not feared. It arrived gradually, softened by firelight, accompanied by familiar sounds. Crickets, wind through leaves, the settling of wood. Sleep was not an escape. It was continuation. body resting while the world continued its quiet motion. You do not need to stay awake for this part. If your thoughts begin to drift, that is exactly right. The story does not require attention, only presence. Seasons passed without explanation. Cold did not need a cause. Warmth did not need a name. People adjusted. Clothing thickened. Fires lasted longer, and life continued. There were no beginnings and endings yet, only cycles. Planting led to waiting. Waiting led to gathering. Gathering led to rest. Then again, over time, patterns became familiar. So familiar they felt timeless. And perhaps this is why later, stories would begin to form. But not yet. Here, the world is still quiet. As your breathing slows, you may feel the same patience settling in. No urgency, no direction required, just the slow passing of moments. This was the Slavic world before gods, before meaning became narrative, before the unseen needed shape. A world held together by habit, by observation, by rest. And as the night deepens, there is nothing more you need to understand. The body knows how to rest, just as it always has. The day began without announcement. There was no moment that declared its arrival. Light simply found its way through the trees. People stirred when warmth returned, not because they were told to, but because the body knew when rest had ended. The land shaped the rhythm of every movement, not through rules, but through quiet suggestion. Fields were not owned in the way they would later be understood. They were shared spaces of effort, places where time was invested slowly. Soil was touched carefully, not with urgency, but with familiarity. Hands learned the texture of earth when it was ready and when it needed patience. As you listen, you may notice how the pace continues to soften. Nothing here moves quickly. Tools were simple, shaped over time, used until they no longer served. When something broke, it was repaired or left behind without frustration. There was no expectation of permanence, only usefulness. Water guided settlement more than choice. Streams offered consistency. Rivers offered movement. People learned to live beside them, not above them, not against them. Paths formed naturally, pressed into the ground by repeated walking. They curved where the land asked them to. No one straightened them. Meals were quiet, taken without ceremony, shared without discussion. Food was not described, it was eaten. Hunger was met, and satisfaction arrived without celebration. You do not need to imagine details clearly. Soft impressions are enough. The way smoke lingered in the air, the sound of wood settling in a fire, the weight of warmth against the skin. Rest existed between tasks, not after them. Moments of stillness appeared naturally. A pause before standing, a pause before continuing. These pauses were not noticed, they were lived. As seasons shifted, clothing changed, shelter thickened. There was no resistance to change, only adjustment. Cold arrived slowly. and preparation followed just as slowly. Life did not rush to meet the future. It waited for it. Children learned by observing, not through instruction. They followed adults at a distance, repeating movements imperfectly until repetition smoothed the motion. No one corrected them sharply. Mistakes were part of the process. There was time. As you listen now, you may feel that same spaciousness. Nothing is required of you. The world did not need to be interpreted. It needed to be responded to. Weather spoke without words. Clouds gathered. Winds shifted. People noticed and adjusted. This was not belief. It was awareness. Night returned without drama. The sky darkened gradually. Stars appeared one by one. There was no need to name them. They simply remained. Sleep arrived when warmth faded, when voices grew quiet, when the body felt heavy enough to rest. The world did not disappear in sleep. It continued. Fires dimmed. Animals settled. Wind moved through branches. As the body rested, life carried on softly. You do not need to stay awake through this. If thoughts drift away, that is part of the story. Nothing important will be missed. Over time, the land shaped people just as people shaped the land, not through intention, but through repetition. Paths deepened, clearings widened, shelter marks remained, then faded. There was no sense of loss, only continuation. This was life before explanation, before systems of belief formed. A world guided by presence, by attention, by rest. And as the night grows deeper, there is nothing more to hold on to. The body can settle. The mind can loosen. The land remains quiet, unconcerned. Time was not something that moved forward. It moved around. There was no sense of being late or early, only of being present when something was needed. Morning did not begin at the same moment each day. It began when light reached a certain place, when warmth returned to the skin. People did not count days. They noticed changes, the length of shadows, the smell of soil, the sound of insects returning. This was how time was felt. Work followed readiness, not schedules. When the ground softened, hands followed. When rain lingered, movement slowed. Nothing was forced into place. As you listen, you may feel how this kind of time loosens the body. There is no pressure to arrive anywhere. Moments expanded naturally. A task took as long as it took. No one watched the sky impatiently. Waiting was part of living. Food was gathered when it was available, stored when it could be. There was no fear of missing something unseen, only attention to what was present. People rested when the body asked for it, not when a signal told them to stop. Sitting was not wasted time. Silence was not empty. It was in these quiet stretches that awareness settled. Someone might pause near the edge of a field, not doing anything, simply standing. No one questioned this stillness. It did not need justification. Children learned this rhythm early. They moved when energy was present, and rested when it faded. There was no attempt to fill every moment, no need to distract the mind. As you rest now, you may notice thoughts slowing, spacing themselves farther apart. That is how the world felt then, without names for hours or minutes, only stretches of experience. The past was not revisited often. The future was not imagined in detail. What mattered was what could be touched, what could be heard, what could be adjusted gently. Seasons did not announce themselves. They arrived quietly. Cooler air in the morning, leaves changing tone, the way sound carried differently. People noticed and changed their habits. No story was required to explain it. As the land rested, so did the people. Winter brought longer nights, and with them, longer periods of stillness. Voices softened, movements slowed. Energy was conserved naturally. There was no fear of the dark, only acceptance of its presence. Firelight created small islands of warmth. The rest of the world waited quietly beyond them. Sleep deepened during these months, arriving earlier, lasting longer. The body adjusted without effort. You do not need to imagine cold or hardship, only a quieter pace, a deeper rest. The mind had fewer things to hold. With less light, thoughts grew simpler. This simplicity did not feel like loss. It felt like relief. Time folded inward. As days shortened, awareness turned toward the immediate, the warmth of breath, the steadiness of a fire, the closeness of shared space. No one spoke of enduring. They simply did, and when warmth slowly returned, life expanded again. Movement increased. Voices grew more frequent, not because something had ended, but because something had shifted. This is how time moved, not in a straight line, but in gentle waves. As you listen, you may feel your own sense of time loosening. There is nothing ahead you need to prepare for, nothing behind you that requires attention. Only this quiet continuation, before gods, before explanations. Life rested inside repetition, and repetition created calm. The body knew when to slow. The mind followed, and as the night deepens now, there is nothing more to understand. Time does not need a name. It is already carrying you. Life did not feel busy, even when hands were moving for most of the day. Activity and rest were not separated. They flowed into one another quietly. A person might begin a task, pause without deciding to pause, then continue when the body felt ready again. There was no urgency behind movement, no sense of racing against something unseen. Daily life shaped itself around necessity, and necessity rarely demanded haste. Food preparation began early, not because it took long, but because it followed the same pattern each day. Grain was handled patiently, ground slowly, cooked carefully. No one hurried the process, because nothing was gained by doing so. Meals were simple, not planned in advance, not discussed in detail. What was available became enough. As you listen, You may notice how this lack of choice feels calming. Nothing needed to be decided. Work continued through repetition, hands remembering movements without thought, carrying, lifting, arranging. These actions did not demand attention. They allowed the mind to remain quiet. People often worked near one another, not speaking much. Sound existed, but it was not constant. The scrape of wood, the dull rhythm of stone, footsteps pressing into earth. These sounds did not interrupt rest. They supported it. Silence was not empty. It was full of familiarity. Children moved in and out of this rhythm, sometimes helping, sometimes watching. They were not directed sharply. Learning came through proximity. Mistakes were allowed to pass. Nothing depended on perfection. This is how ease settled into daily life. As shelters aged, they were repaired gently, a beam replaced, a wall reinforced. No one expected structures to remain unchanged. Change was normal. What lasted was not the building, but the habit of maintaining it. As seasons turned, daily tasks shifted slightly. Longer daylight allowed longer movement. Shorter days brought earlier rest. No one resisted this adjustment. It felt natural. The body responded before thought could interfere. As you rest now, you may notice your own body responding similarly. Breathing deepens. Muscles loosen. Nothing needs to be held tightly. Work ended without announcement, not because it was finished, but because energy faded. Stopping did not require permission. It required awareness. This awareness was not taught. It developed through listening. People learned when to stop by noticing tension, by noticing hunger, by noticing fatigue. The body spoke clearly. Evenings brought quieter movement, less effort, more stillness. Fires were tended slowly. Light adjusted gradually. Conversation softened, then fell away. There was no fear of silence. It was familiar. As darkness settled, the world did not disappear. It simply became less visible. The land remained, waiting. Sleep arrived without struggle, because the day had not demanded too much. Rest was earned naturally, not forced. You do not need to imagine sleep arriving suddenly. It came in layers, eyes growing heavy, thoughts becoming incomplete, awareness narrowing. The body released effort slowly. Night sounds filled the space, gentle, predictable. Nothing threatened this quiet. Nothing interrupted it. And when waking returned again, it felt familiar, expected. This repetition created stability, not through control, but through consistency. Life did not surprise people often, and when it did, they adjusted without panic. There was no expectation of comfort beyond what could be created, and no disappointment when conditions changed. Acceptance was woven into daily routine. As you listen, you may feel that same acceptance settling. Nothing needs improvement right now. Nothing needs explanation. The world can simply continue before God's. before stories carried meaning beyond habit. Life shaped itself quietly, through repetition, through rest, and as the night deepens now, there is nothing more to add. The shape of daily life remains steady, unconcerned. You can allow your attention to soften, letting the rhythm carry you. Knowledge did not arrive through teaching. It emerged through living. There were no moments set aside for explanation, no separation between learning and doing. Understanding formed quietly, through repetition, through observation. A child watched hands move, watched how tools were held, watched when effort increased and when it softened. Nothing needed to be corrected sharply, because there was time. Mistakes were not events. They were part of the process. If something was done poorly, it was simply done again later. No urgency followed error. No frustration lingered. As you listen, you may feel how this absence of pressure settles the body. Nothing here must be mastered. Skills formed slowly, hands remembering what the mind never stored, carrying water, shaping wood, preparing food. Each movement improved without instruction, because repetition smoothed the edges. People learned when to act by watching others pause, when to stop by noticing fatigue in themselves. Awareness was shared quietly, not spoken aloud. The land itself was a teacher, not through rules, but through response. When soil resisted, hands adjusted. When weather shifted, plans softened. Nothing argued against these signals. They were accepted. Children learned the shape of seasons by feeling them. Cold in the morning air, warmth lingering longer each evening. There was no need to explain change. It announced itself gently. As you rest now, you may notice your own awareness responding, listening without effort. Learning happened in stillness as much as action. Someone might sit quietly for long stretches, watching light move across the ground. No one asked what they were doing, because being present was enough. Memory formed without intention, not stored as facts, but as familiarity. The body remembered how far to walk, how long to wait, when to begin again. This knowledge did not belong to individuals. It belonged to the group. Patterns were shared without being named. Over time, these shared habits created cohesion. People moved together without planning, paused together without instruction. No signal was required. As night approached, children learned when to quiet by watching adults settle. Voices softened, movements slowed. There was no command to rest. Rest arrived naturally. Sleep was not enforced. It was invited, and the body accepted. You do not need to hold on to this. Understanding does not need to remain awake. The story continues even when attention fades. Over seasons, these quiet ways of learning shaped people deeply, not into specialists, but into participants. Everyone knew enough to live, enough to adjust. No one carried excess knowledge. Nothing unnecessary weighed the mind. As the world remained predictable, learning remained gentle. When change did arrive, it was absorbed slowly. A new tool, a different method, adopted only if it fit naturally. Nothing was forced into place. Nothing disrupted the rhythm abruptly. This pace protected rest, protected attention. As you listen, you may feel that protection now. Nothing here asks for focus. Nothing demands effort. Awareness can drift, and still the story holds. Before gods, before formal belief, understanding lived in the body, and the body carried it quietly. Learning did not push forward, it unfolded. And as the night deepens further, there is nothing left to learn right now. The body knows how to rest, just as it always has. You can allow thought to loosen and let familiarity carry you onward. Life was not experienced alone, but it was also not crowded. People lived close enough to feel one another's presence without feeling watched or confined. Space was shared naturally, not negotiated. Shelters were near, but not pressing against one another. Each held its own quiet, while remaining part of the whole. Movement through shared space was unremarkable. Someone passed by, someone paused. No greeting was required every time. Familiarity made silence comfortable. As you listen, you may notice how this sense of belonging feels gentle. There is no demand placed on you. Belonging did not come from agreement or shared belief. It came from repetition, from seeing the same faces, from moving through the same places. People recognized one another by rhythm, by how they walked, by how they carried weight. Words were not always necessary. Work often happened side by side, not because it required help, but because presence felt natural. Two people might prepare the same task, not coordinating, simply aware of one another. This awareness did not interrupt rest. It supported it. No one felt alone while being quiet, and no one felt crowded while being near. Children drifted between groups, lingering where they felt comfortable. No one tracked their movement closely. Trust replaced supervision. Mistakes were absorbed by the group, not assigned to individuals. If something was forgotten, someone else noticed. If effort lagged, it balanced out over time. This created a steady calm, not perfection. As evening approached, shared space softened. People returned to familiar places, not because they were told to, but because the day was closing. Light dimmed, movement slowed. There was no announcement of togetherness. It simply existed. Someone tended a fire, another adjusted shelter. No coordination was required. Each action fit naturally into the moment. Conversation arose briefly, then faded again. Words were exchanged only when needed. Silence filled the rest. As you rest now, you may feel how this silence feels safe. It does not demand response. Shared meals reinforced this calm, not through ritual, but through consistency. Eating together did not require attention. It was simply how food was taken. No one rushed ahead. No one waited behind. The pace balanced itself. Afterward, people lingered, not discussing plans, not recounting the day, just remaining. The presence of others did not disturb rest. It made it deeper. At night, shared space narrowed. Darkness brought a sense of closeness, not through fear, but through reduced movement. Sounds became fewer, more familiar. The crackle of fire, breathing nearby. The wind outside shelter walls. These sounds did not require interpretation. They signaled continuity. Sleep arrived knowing others were near, even if unseen. This proximity allowed the body to release vigilance. Rest became easier. You do not need to imagine faces or details. Only the feeling of quiet company. Over time, this way of sharing space shaped trust. Not trust in ideas, but trust in rhythm. People knew how others would move, when they would rest, when they would rise. Predictability brought ease. No one needed to assert belonging. It was lived daily. As seasons passed, this shared rhythm adjusted naturally. Closer during cold, more spread during warmth. No discussion marked the change. Bodies responded automatically. As you listen, you may notice your own sense of space softening. Nothing presses close. Nothing feels distant. You are held within the story, without effort, before gods, before defined roles. Belonging existed without explanation. It did not depend on belief or agreement, only on presence. And as the night deepens further, there is nothing you need to contribute. You are already part of this quiet continuity. Shared space remains. Calm, unconcerned, you can allow awareness to fade slightly, knowing nothing will be missed. The rhythm continues, with or without attention. Trust did not need to be declared. It formed slowly, through repeated days, through familiar movement. People did not ask whether they belonged. Belonging was felt. It lived in the way tasks were shared, in the way space was respected, in the way silence was allowed. No one announced their intentions each morning. They simply began. Others noticed and adjusted naturally. As you listen, you may sense how this quiet trust feels steady. It does not rise suddenly. It does not fall away easily. If someone moved more slowly one day, nothing was said. Work shifted. Effort redistributed. There was no score kept, no memory of imbalance. Trust existed because patterns repeated reliably. People knew who would return, who would remain, who would continue. Not because promises were made, but because days unfolded the same way again and again. This reliability was not rigid. It allowed for change. Someone might step away for a time, then return. The rhythm absorbed absence and welcomed return without comment. Children felt this trust early. They moved freely within shared space, knowing someone would notice if needed, but not watch constantly. Freedom and safety existed together, not as opposites, but as partners. As evening approached, people often gathered loosely, not for ceremony, not for instruction, simply because the day was ending. Bodies slowed together, energy lowered. No one directed this shift. It happened through awareness. Someone might sit near another, not speaking, just sharing warmth. This closeness did not demand interaction. It offered reassurance. As you rest now, you may feel how this reassurance settles the body. Nothing here expects response. If conflict arose, it rarely escalated. Tension was felt early and eased quietly. People adjusted distance, paused interaction. No one forced resolution. Time softened edges. The land itself encouraged patience. Seasons moved slowly. Urgency felt out of place. Trust extended beyond individuals. It included routine, environment. People trusted the river to return, the forest to remain. Even when conditions changed, the pattern endured. This trust was not belief, it was familiarity. As darkness settled, the sense of togetherness deepened, not through conversation, but through reduced movement. The world grew smaller, more contained. Firelight marked presence. Shadows softened edges. Breathing became noticeable, slow. Even sleep arrived knowing others were near. Even if unseen, this proximity allowed deeper rest. The body released vigilance. Because patterns felt stable, you do not need to imagine danger fading, only effort dissolving. Over time, this quiet trust shaped how people understood themselves, not as separate units, but as parts of a larger rhythm. Individual identity was not emphasized, nor erased. It rested quietly within the whole. People knew their place without naming it. As seasons passed, this trust adapted. Harsh weather drew people closer. Abundance allowed more space. No one debated these changes. They were felt. As you listen, you may feel how your own awareness softens. Nothing needs to be monitored. The story continues without effort, before gods, before formal systems of belief. Trust lived in repetition, in presence. It did not need words, and as the night deepens further, there is nothing you need to hold together. The rhythm holds itself. Quiet bonds remain, unspoken, steady. You can allow attention to drift, knowing nothing will fall apart. Trust does not require watching. It already exists. Memory did not live in stories yet. It lived in places. The land itself held what people needed to remember. Paths curved where they always had. Clearings remained open because they were used. Nothing was marked for remembrance. Nothing was set aside as sacred. And yet, everything carried familiarity. A bend in the river signaled when to slow. A cluster of trees meant shelter from wind. A rise in the ground meant dry footing after rain. People did not think of these as memories. They were simply known. As you listen, you may feel how this kind of knowing does not strain the mind. It rests in the body. Movement followed recognition. Feet turned without decision. Hands reached without hesitation. The land guided behavior quietly. without instruction. Someone returning from a distance did not need directions. The world itself provided them. Paths were not drawn, they were worn in. Repeated walking pressed understanding into the ground, and the ground returned it with ease. Children learned the shape of the land early, not by being told, but by wandering within safe distance. They recognized places by feeling, not by name. A hollow where sound changed, a slope where running became easier. These places were remembered without effort. Over time, the land became a shared reference. When someone paused near a certain tree, others understood. When a path was avoided, the reason was already known. Nothing required explanation. As seasons passed, the land recorded change. Grass flattened in areas of frequent rest. Soil darkened where fires had warmed it. These marks were not seen as traces of the past. They were part of the present. Memory did not pull backward. It surrounded daily life. As you rest now, you may notice how this kind of memory feels steady. It does not rush forward or backward. It remains. When weather altered familiar places, people adjusted. A flooded path led to another route. A fallen tree became a marker instead of an obstacle. Change did not erase memory. It added to it. The land adapted, and people adapted with it. No one tried to preserve things exactly as they were, because continuity did not require sameness. It required presence. Night changed the land as well. Familiar spaces softened, edges blurred, distances shortened. Firelight created temporary centers. The rest of the world waited quietly beyond. Memory adjusted to darkness, not through fear, but through awareness. Sounds replaced sight. Textures replaced shape. People learned where they were by listening, by feeling the ground beneath their feet. As you listen now, you may notice how your own awareness shifts, less focused on detail, more on sensation. This is how memory worked. Without effort, morning returned, and the land revealed itself again. Nothing had been lost overnight. It had only rested. Memory did not require keeping. It resurfaced naturally. Over generations, these familiar spaces shaped identity, not through lineage, but through continuity of movement. People felt they belonged because they knew where to step, where to pause, where to rest. No one needed to declare this belonging. It was reinforced daily. As seasons repeated, the land held time gently. Old paths deepened. New ones formed slowly. Nothing appeared suddenly. Nothing vanished abruptly. This gradual change protected rest, protected familiarity. As you drift now, you may feel how this steadiness calms the mind. There is no need to remember details. Memory here is not something to hold. It holds you before gods, before stories assigned meaning. The land carried memory without words, and people lived inside it, not as observers, but as participants. As the night deepens further, awareness can soften. Nothing needs to be recalled later. Nothing needs to be stored. The land remembers, so the body can rest. Familiar paths remain, even when unseen, and you can allow your attention to drift, knowing you are still carried by quiet continuity, by steady ground. The land holds its shape, calm, unchanging in its patience. You do not need to follow every word. The rhythm is enough. Memory settles into place. Without effort, change did not arrive as an event. It arrived as a feeling. A slight difference in the air. A shift in how the ground responded underfoot. Nothing announced itself. Nothing demanded immediate attention. People noticed change the same way they noticed everything else. By living inside it. One season leaned gently into the next, without sharp edges. Warmth lingered a little longer one year. Cold returned a little earlier another. These changes were not discussed at length. They were absorbed. As you listen, you may feel how this gradual movement feels calming. There is no sudden turn. Tools adjusted slowly. Clothing thickened or lightened. Shelter was reinforced or opened. No one felt the need to preserve an earlier version of life because nothing had been lost. Continuity did not depend on sameness. It depended on rhythm. A familiar task might be done slightly differently. A path might curve in a new direction. These changes did not break memory. They extended it. People did not resist adaptation because adaptation was not framed as failure. It was simply response. As days passed, new habits formed quietly, not all at once, but one small adjustment at a time. Someone might begin resting earlier in the evening. Another might wake slightly later. The group adjusted without coordination because the rhythm allowed flexibility. As you rest now, you may feel that same flexibility in your own body. Nothing is fixed tightly. Change was not feared because it was familiar. It had always been present. No era felt permanent, so no shift felt threatening. Even when conditions grew difficult, the response remained measured. Effort increased where needed, then softened again when pressure eased. Nothing stayed intense for long. People learned to trust this cycle, not because it was explained, but because it repeated. After strain came release. After effort came rest. This balance protected the body, protected the mind. As seasons turned, change became expected, not anticipated anxiously, but welcomed as part of movement. Children learned this early. They did not cling to familiar arrangements. They followed shifts naturally, playing where space opened, resting where quiet gathered. They were not taught to hold on. They were allowed to flow. As you listen, you may notice how this permission to change feels relieving. Nothing here needs to remain the same. Even shared space adapted. Shelters expanded or contracted. Paths widened or narrowed. These adjustments were not seen as improvements or declines. They were responses. No one compared the present to the past with judgment. Comparison did not shape understanding yet. The world simply moved. Night reflected this gentle change as well. Some nights felt deeper, others lighter. Sleep responded accordingly, longer when needed, shorter when energy returned. The body led, the mind followed. You do not need to stay aware of this. The rhythm continues even if attention fades. Over time, these subtle changes shaped the future, not through planning, but through accumulation. Small adjustments layered gently until life looked different, but never suddenly. Looking back was not common because there was no clear point to look from. Change had no starting place and no ending. It was always already happening. As you rest now, you may feel how this understanding loosens concern. Nothing needs to be protected from movement. Before gods, before stories of beginnings and endings, change existed without explanation. It did not threaten meaning, because meaning had not been fixed yet. Life adjusted and continued, and as the night deepens further, there is nothing you need to prepare for. Change will arrive gently and pass gently. The body can rest knowing this. Nothing will break suddenly. Nothing will be demanded all at once. The rhythm remains steady, patient. You can allow awareness to soften further, letting movement carry you. Change does not rush. It walks quietly beside you, and rest remains available. At every moment, life did not feel as though it was moving toward something. It felt as though it was continuing. There was no distant goal shaping the present, no future imagined in detail. People did not ask what life was becoming. They focused on how it was unfolding. Each day followed the last without needing distinction. Not identical, but familiar enough to feel steady. As you listen, you may notice how this absence of direction feels calming. Nothing is pulling you forward. The sense of continuation lived in repetition, waking, moving, resting, not as obligation, but as flow. People did not measure progress. They noticed continuity. If something worked yesterday, it would likely work again today. If it did not, adjustment came naturally. No moment carried the weight of decision, because no moment was final. Tasks blended into one another, without sharp boundaries. Preparing food led into eating. Eating led into stillness. Stillness led into sleep. Nothing needed to be marked as complete. As seasons repeated, continuation became expected. Cold did not signal an ending. Warmth did not signal a beginning. They were phases within a larger movement. The land reinforced this feeling. Rivers continued regardless of attention. Forests changed slowly. People lived alongside this persistence, not attempting to control it. As you rest now, you may feel that same persistence holding you. Breath continuing without effort. The body understood continuation deeply. Hunger returned. Fatigue followed effort. These cycles required no interpretation. Sleep itself was part of continuation, not an interruption. The world did not pause when eyes closed. It carried on quietly. This allowed the mind to release vigilance. Nothing needed guarding. Dreaming did not carry meaning yet. It was simply another state of rest. Morning returned, not as renewal, but as continuation. The same land, the same air, slightly altered, but unchanged in essence. People did not greet the day with expectation. They accepted it as it arrived. As time passed, this acceptance deepened. Life did not demand explanation, so explanation did not form. Meaning existed in familiarity, not in interpretation. A place felt right because it always had. A path felt safe because it was known. There was no search for purpose beyond living. As you listen, you may feel how this releases pressure. Nothing here must be achieved. Continuation softened fear of loss, because nothing was seen as singular. If something ended, something else continued. The rhythm absorbed absence without disruption. People did not hold tightly to moments, because moments were not rare. Another would follow, and another. This understanding allowed ease, not indifference. Care existed, but without anxiety. People maintained what they could and released what they could not. The land modeled this balance. Trees shed leaves. Rivers overflowed, then receded. Nothing resisted its own movement. Night reinforced this sense of continuation. Darkness did not end the day. It carried it into rest. Fires dimmed. Sounds softened. The world narrowed, but did not disappear. Sleep arrived knowing morning would follow, not because it was promised, but because it always had. As you drift now, you may notice how this expectation feels gentle. It does not require hope. It is simply known. Over generations, this sense of continuation shaped calm. People did not fear endings intensely, because endings were partial. Something always remained, even when life shifted noticeably. The rhythm endured beneath change. This endurance was not celebrated. It was lived. As you listen, you do not need to stay awake to understand this. The body already knows. Breath continues. Heartbeat remains steady. Nothing here requires supervision. Before gods, before stories framed existence, continuation existed without explanation. Life flowed forward without naming its direction. And as the night deepens further, you can allow awareness to soften completely. Nothing needs to be remembered later. Nothing needs to be concluded. The rhythm will carry on, with or without attention. Rest is part of continuation, not a pause from it. You are already inside the movement, held gently. The world continues, quietly, patiently, and you can drift with it, without effort. Nothing in life demanded immediate response. There were moments that required attention, but attention did not mean haste. People learned early that rushing changed little, except the body. Effort increased tension. Tension disturbed rest, so movement remained measured. Even when work was necessary, tasks waited when needed. and resumed when the body allowed. No one feared delay, because time was not counted in narrow pieces. As you listen, you may feel how this absence of urgency softens the chest. Breath no longer needs to keep pace. Life unfolded at a speed set by conditions, not by expectation. If rain lingered, plans adjusted. If warmth lasted, movement continued. Nothing felt late. Nothing felt early. Only appropriate. People did not prepare excessively for what might come. They prepared for what usually did. Wood was gathered before cold settled fully. Food was stored when abundance allowed. Preparation did not stem from anxiety. It came from familiarity. This familiarity removed urgency because the pattern was known. As the body rested now, you may notice how planning loosens its grip. Nothing needs anticipation. The day did not feel like something to complete. It felt like something to move within. Work began naturally and ended without announcement. There was no final task that defined success, only a gradual easing of effort. People stopped when the body signaled enough, not when an external measure was reached. This created a deep trust in physical awareness. The body was listened to. Fatigue was not resisted. It was respected. Rest followed without guilt, because rest was part of continuation. As evening arrived, the pace slowed further. Light dimmed, voices softened. There was no rush to conclude the day. It concluded itself. Night did not threaten productivity, because productivity was not measured. Darkness simply shifted activity inward. As you rest now, you may feel that same permission to stop. Nothing remains unfinished. Urgency had little place here, because survival did not depend on constant motion. The land provided signals early. Cold arrived gradually. Hunger developed slowly. There was time to respond. This pacing shaped calm deeply. The nervous system did not remain alert. There was no expectation of sudden disruption, only gradual change. Even uncertainty did not create urgency. It created attentiveness. People watched carefully, but did not hurry. This watching did not strain the eyes or mind. It rested within awareness. As seasons repeated, this lack of urgency became embodied. Movements slowed slightly with age, and no one tried to correct this. Speed was not valued. Consistency was. People were not praised for doing more. They were valued for remaining present. Presence mattered more than output. As you listen, you may notice how this perspective quiets inner pressure. Nothing here needs acceleration. Life did not feel like a race against loss, because loss was gradual. Even decline arrived gently, allowing time for adjustment. People adapted before strain became overwhelming. This gentle pacing protected sleep. Night rest deepened because the day had not overreached. Sleep was not compensation. It was continuation. The body entered rest without resistance, because it had not been pushed beyond comfort. As the night deepens further, you may feel how this sense of ease spreads. Nothing remains urgent. Nothing requires effort. Breath moves at its own pace. Thoughts arrive less frequently. The world does not rush you, and you do not rush the world. Before gods, before systems that divided time into demands, life moved gently within its own limits. Urgency had not yet been learned, and as awareness softens now, you can allow the same gentleness to settle. There is nothing waiting immediately after this moment, nothing pressing forward. The rhythm continues without strain. Rest belongs naturally here, and you can drift into it without concern. Life will continue, quietly, patiently, even as attention fades. Care was not spoken of directly. It was practiced. People did not announce concern for one another. They adjusted their actions quietly. Someone might leave food closer than usual. Another might take on a heavier task without comment. These gestures were not recognized as kindness. They were simply part of living together. Care existed without language because it did not need explanation. As you listen, you may feel how this quiet attention softens the body. Nothing here asks to be noticed. The young were watched without constant supervision. The old were accommodated without discussion. No role was highlighted. No effort was praised loudly. Balance emerged naturally. When someone rested more than usual, the rhythm adjusted. Nothing was taken away. Nothing was demanded in return. Care did not create debt. It created continuity. People trusted that attention would return when needed, because it always had. This trust reduced anxiety. No one worried about being forgotten. As seasons changed, care adapted. Cold brought closer proximity. Warmth allowed more space. These shifts were not planned. They were felt. The body sensed when closeness was helpful, and when distance felt natural. Care extended beyond people. It included tools, shelter, land. Objects were not discarded quickly. They were repaired, reused. When something finally failed, it was released without frustration. This prevented accumulation, both of objects and of worry. As you rest now, you may feel how this simplicity creates ease. Nothing needs to be held onto tightly. Daily routines included moments of gentle checking, a glance, a pause, not intrusive, not demanding, just enough to remain aware. No one monitored well-being closely, but changes were noticed. If energy faded, tasks lightened. If strength returned, movement followed. The body was trusted to communicate, and communication was respected. This mutual responsiveness allowed calm to persist. No one was pushed beyond capacity. As night approached, care shifted toward rest. Fires were kept steady. Light softened. The environment itself encouraged slowing. Sleep was protected quietly, not by rules, but by shared rhythm. Voices lowered automatically. Movement became minimal. No one disrupted rest unnecessarily. because rest was understood as necessary. As you listen, you may feel that same protection now. Nothing here will pull you awake. Even illness did not create alarm. Attention increased. Pace slowed further. There was time. Care did not panic. It observed. The body was allowed to recover at its own speed. This patience prevented fear from spreading. Calm remained intact. Over time, this way of caring shaped resilience. Not resilience through endurance, but through balance. People did not push through discomfort unnecessarily. They adjusted early. As a result, recovery was gentle. As you rest now, you may notice how this permission to adjust feels relieving. Nothing must be endured silently. Care did not isolate, but it also did not overwhelm. Support arrived without spectacle and withdrew when no longer needed. No one was defined by receiving care or by giving it. It was simply part of the flow. This prevented identity from hardening around roles. Everyone remained flexible. As seasons repeated, care remained consistent, not identical, but reliable. This reliability allowed the nervous system to rest. There was no expectation of sudden abandonment. As night deepens now, you can allow your own awareness to soften. Nothing here requires effort. Nothing here asks for vigilance. Care continues quietly, with or without attention, before gods, before formal ethics. Care existed as rhythm, as adjustment, and as rest settles further. You can allow yourself to be held within this quiet continuity. Nothing needs to be solved. Nothing needs to be improved. The rhythm knows how to continue, and rest belongs naturally within it. You can drift gently now, knowing attention remains present even as awareness fades. Care does not sleep. It simply softens. Endurance did not feel like effort. It felt like remaining. People did not speak of lasting through hardship. They simply stayed present while conditions changed. There was no dramatic moment where strength was tested, only a series of small adjustments. If the cold lingered longer than expected, movement slowed further. If food grew scarce for a time, meals became simpler. Nothing was framed as sacrifice. Nothing was dramatized. As you listen, you may feel how this quiet endurance eases tension. Nothing here asks you to push through discomfort. The body was not forced into resilience. It was allowed to adapt. Fatigue was treated as information, not as failure. When energy waned, rest increased. When strength returned, movement followed naturally. This prevented exhaustion from accumulating. Endurance remained sustainable. People trusted that difficult periods would soften because they always had. No one counted how long a challenge lasted. Counting would not have changed it. Time passed regardless, and with time, conditions shifted. As seasons repeated, endurance became quiet confidence, not confidence in control, but confidence in adjustment. Life did not require constant reinforcement. It held itself together through rhythm. As you rest now, you may notice how this trust allows deeper relaxation. Nothing here threatens stability. Even loss was absorbed gradually, not suddenly. Absence was noticed, but it did not collapse the whole. Others filled spaces quietly, not as replacements, but as continuation. This prevented grief from becoming overwhelming. Time softened edges naturally. Memory remained, but it did not demand constant attention. The land itself modeled endurance. Trees weathered storms. Rivers endured droughts and floods. People lived alongside this persistence, learning without instruction. Endurance was not admired loudly. It was lived. No one sought recognition for remaining. Remaining was expected. As you listen, you may feel how this expectation feels gentle. There is no pressure to prove strength. Weakness was not singled out. It was part of fluctuation. The body moved between states naturally. Strong, tired, rested. None of these required explanation. This fluidity protected rest deeply. The nervous system was not kept alert by fear of failure. Even when conditions felt uncertain, the response remained measured. Attention increased slightly. Movement slowed. Nothing escalated beyond necessity. As night approached, endurance shifted into rest. The day was not evaluated. It was released. Sleep carried endurance forward, not as recovery from strain, but as part of continuation. The body entered rest knowing effort had been sufficient. Nothing more was required. As you drift now, you may notice how this permission settles deeply. There is nothing left to endure right now. Endurance does not ask for wakefulness. It allows rest. Over generations, this quiet endurance shaped stability. Not rigid stability, but flexible persistence. Life bent without breaking, because it did not resist change aggressively. As seasons layered over one another, endurance remained constant beneath variation. This constancy did not need protection. It renewed itself through rhythm. As you listen, you may feel how this steadiness supports sleep. The mind does not need to stay alert. Nothing here depends on vigilance. Nothing will collapse if attention fades before gods, before heroic stories of survival. Endurance existed without drama. It lived in patience, in adjustment, in rest. And as the night deepens further, you can allow awareness to soften completely. There is nothing left to face, nothing left to hold up. Endurance continues quietly. Even while you sleep, the rhythm remains steady, patient, unconcerned, and you are carried within it without effort. You can rest now, knowing endurance does not require attention. It is already present. Nothing in this world moved toward a conclusion. Things did not gather themselves for an ending. Life simply continued, softly, without ceremony. The land remained, not waiting, not expecting, just present. People did not imagine a final moment. or a time when everything would be understood. Understanding was not the goal. Living was. Days arrived, passed, and returned in altered form. Night followed, not to close the day, but to carry it into rest. As you listen now, you may feel how this absence of finality eases the mind. Nothing here needs resolution. The world did not require remembrance, because it never truly left, even when people moved, even when shelters changed. The rhythm endured. Paths remained where feet had passed. Clearings stayed open where life gathered. No one preserved these intentionally. They remained because they were lived within. As awareness softens, you may notice how this feels familiar. Even now, breath continues without instruction. The body adjusts quietly. Nothing asks for explanation. Before gods, before stories shaped meaning. Rest was already part of the world. Rest was not earned. It was allowed. When effort faded, stillness arrived, not as reward, but as balance. The body returned to rest the same way the land returned to quiet. Naturally, no one counted how much had been done or how much remained. Completion was not measured because nothing was ever truly finished. One task flowed into another. One season leaned into the next, and when something no longer continued, something else quietly took its place. As you rest now, you may feel how this ongoingness removes pressure. There is no final state you must reach. Even sleep is not an ending. It is another form of presence. The world does not pause when awareness fades. It holds steady. This steadiness allowed deep rest, because vigilance was unnecessary. Nothing here required guarding. Nothing demanded attention through fear. Night sounds softened. Breathing slowed. The body recognized safety without being told. As generations passed, this quiet way of living shaped calm deeply. Not calm as an idea, but calm as a condition. The nervous system did not remain alert. It trusted continuity, and this trust allowed sleep to arrive gently. As you listen now, you may feel the same trust settling. Nothing will be missed if attention drifts. Nothing important depends on wakefulness. The world continues whether observed or not. Before gods, before belief systems tried to explain existence, life did not need explanation to continue. It moved, adjusted, rested, and remained. As the night deepens further, there is no need to stay with the words. The rhythm carries on without them. Awareness can soften. Thoughts can loosen. Nothing pulls you forward. Nothing pushes you back. You are already inside the flow. The Slavic world before gods does not end here. It simply fades from focus, like footsteps growing quieter, like light dimming naturally, still present, even when unseen. And as rest settles fully now, you can allow yourself to drift, knowing the world remains steady, patient, unconcerned. Nothing asks for conclusion. Nothing requires closure. The rhythm continues, and sleep belongs within it. You do not need to follow any further. The body already knows how to rest. And so the world carries on quietly, as it always has. The words no longer need to carry anything forward. They can slow now. What has been described does not end. It simply no longer needs attention. The land remains as it always has. Quiet, unconcerned. Paths still exist whether they are followed or not. Rhythms continue whether they are noticed or not. Nothing depends on listening. As your awareness softens, you do not leave this world behind. You rest within it. Breath moves gently. The body settles where it is. There is no need to remember what came before. Memory is not required now. The Slavic world before gods does not close. It simply becomes background, like the sound of wind that fades without stopping, like darkness that deepens without effort. Sleep does not interrupt anything. It continues the same quiet rhythm. Nothing waits for you after this moment. Nothing calls you away. You can rest fully, knowing the world does not need watching. It holds itself patiently, steadily, and as attention loosens completely now, there is nothing more to follow. The rhythm carries on, and you are already at rest within it.